broadcasting from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another WilmsFront featured interview show on this Thursday, the 8th of December, 2022. Tonight, we are broadcasting on the WilmsFront YouTube, DLive, and Odyssey channels, and also on Entropy. It is 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria, where after a scorching summer weekend, it has been a week of wind and rain. How predictably Melbourne, although it is the sun and warmth, is forecast to return this weekend, fingers crossed. Christmas is quickly approaching, and what a difference a year makes. Last Christmas, Australia was still divided with interstate travel restrictions and border closures throughout. Many Australians had lost their jobs and were locked out of everyday life for not making an informed choice not to get the COVID vaccine. This year, thanks to dedicated activists who organised pro-freedom, pro-medical choice rallies all around Australia, which were attended by thousands, we saw the slow dismantling of much of the nation's vaccine passport and mandate system. But even now, despite the truth about the COVID vaccines not being able to stop transmission, COVID vaccine mandates are still in place, and in many industries and by government decree. And even some private companies are still enforcing their own COVID vaccine mandates on their employees. My guest tonight had his career brought to an end when a vaccine mandate came to his workplace. So I'll let him introduce himself.
My name's Graham Hood, and I am a 53-year veteran in aviation. I've been a pilot for 53 years. I've been an employee of Qantas for 32 years. And had my command with Qantas for 32 years. I've been employed by TAA, Australian Airlines, Air Queensland, Bush Pilot Airways. I've been a crop dusting pilot. I have been a charter pilot. I've flown the venerable DC-3 around Cape York and the Gulf of Carpentaria. And I'm a very proud Australian and a proud employee of Qantas. But that's all struggling with me a little bit at the moment. I have flown some 35,000 hours. I have done 20,000 takeoffs and landings. I have spent 2,800 nights or so in hotel rooms. That amounts to almost 8 years in hotel rooms. I've done 175 simulators. I think I've passed all of them. I've been thoroughly tested with over 50 medical examinations to hold my licence. And everything I stand for is now being threatened by a ridiculous mandate that I cannot support. It's a mandate that all aviation workers in the industry are now being forced to adopt, and that is no jab, no job.
Captain Graham Hood, affectionately known as Hoody, since his viral video in 2021, which you just saw a segment from, taking a stand against Qantas vaccine mandate, which is still in force for Qantas employees to this day. It has seen him become one of the most prominent campaigners against medical cohesion and for traditional freedom in Australia. He took part in the massive convoy to Canberra back in February against medical discrimination and coercion. He's done 2 speaking tours of Australia. He just got back from one recently. So I'm very grateful that he's joining me on WilmsFront tonight. Graham Hoody, welcome.
Good to see you, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Now, as I said, Qantas still has its vaccine mandate for staff. One of the other major corporations that had a vaccine mandate, Woolworths, they recently dropped theirs, but not Qantas. And there's no indication, it seems, that it's going to be dropped.
Yeah, Qantas are in a very awkward position at the moment because they stated they were one of the first companies to bring out the mandates, and they stated that it was fair and reasonable, or lawful and reasonable. That's right. That were their words. It's lawful and reasonable to impose. But in actual fact, their actions have been fraudulent because their actions were not based on any proper research or science, and that it's now been proven, even admitted by Pfizer, that the vaccines were never tested to stop transmission, and people have lost their careers, people have lost their homes, and these are careers that are hard fought for, Tim. They're not just something you wake up one day and decide, oh, I'll do that and I'll give that a try. People in my career have been wanting to do it since they were children, and to have their careers snuffed out by this corporate expediency is reprehensible. And Qantas will be facing multiple legal actions, I'm sure, because everything they've done has been based on a lie. And we can say that about all the corporations that have brought in these mandates. So looking forward to seeing that happen, actually. But they did put out a survey, which was the results of which were meant to be released about 2.5 weeks ago, talking about that. The question that was asked was, do you support the mandate? And all the staff in the company were asked to reply to that. And the results should have been issued about 2 weeks ago. They haven't issued them. I think they're doing that deliberately. I think they've realised that they're in a very awkward legal position, and we're just going to keep spruiking this until they change their minds. But people need to be reinstated into their positions, into their old seniority, and they need to be fully reimbursed and compensated. It's just an absolute disgrace. I'm ashamed to mention the word sometimes, Qantas. I really am.
2022, it hasn't been the bounce back in terms of customer satisfaction that Qantas were hoping for. There's been numerous flight cancellation delays in getting baggage to flyers. There was an appalling viral video of some Melbourne baggage workers clunking customers' flyers' luggage. That was just appalling. I myself haven't flown this year because of all of the hoops that the governments and the airlines made customers and flyers go through. But the CEO of Qantas, Alan Joyce, he's been in the position since 2008. He's still flying high, to use a pun, and he's seen off many opponents during his tenure. First, it was the trade unions, then it was traditional marriage supporters, and now it's freedom advocates and now former employees who won't yield to his vaccine mandates. And he looked pretty unapologetic when he was confronted by Simeon Boykov, the Aussie Cossack, telling him to piss off and fuck off.
So you discriminate against the unvaccinated, and we're calling you out, buddy.
Mate,
and you just told me to piss off on camera. What a disgrace you are.
Well, you're a disgrace for somebody just walking down the street.
You're not somebody. You're a grub. That's who you are, mate.
Fuck off.
Ooh, on camera.
It seems that throughout his time at Qantas, he's always been able to get his way.
Oh, absolutely. He's quite the bully, is Alan Joyce. He's a very astute man, and people mustn't underestimate him. He did bring the company to profitability and made it a viable organisation for many years, and the profitability held them over through the COVID disaster that we've had, this pandemic disaster. I call it a disaster from the business viewpoint. He has credit where credit's due. He's a very skilled mathematician, and but he is a ruthless individual. The whole company is run by human resources and industrial relations and the spin doctors, and they thrive under his leadership. I've had several run-ins with him. I give, as I said, I give credit where credit's due. But at the moment, I just see him as out of touch completely. He's not the CEO for this time at Qantas, and I think he needs to get out of the public arena altogether. I think he's a social engineer, and I don't think too many Australians take kindly to the corporate CEOs becoming social engineers. I think it's time he went. I think it's time that most of the board that keep him in there need to go as well. And the sooner that he's gone and some of the board members are gone, the better off Qantas will be. There's no doubt in my mind that he has used his position as a CEO to become a social engineer in Australia, and that speaks volumes about the dysfunction of the Australian government, because we don't elect our corporate leadership in this country. We can't elect them. The only people we can elect are the politicians, the candidates who run for office. And yet all the power is in the hands of the corporate CEOs. And that's got to stop. Corporate CEOs can't be allowed to abuse the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution and impose mandates and other conditions that they're imposing, while the government just sits there and smiles because the corporate CEOs are doing their hatchet jobs for them. I think it's reprehensible, Tim, and I think it needs to definitely be looked at, and it needs to stop. And that's why we're all calling for a Royal Commission, or better, something a bit stronger than a Royal Commission to bring this to heel.
I agree with you that Alan Joyce, he's a good business manager, but as you said, he is a bully as well. He turned Qantas to profitability, but it seems he's not alone in terms of that. Corporations, they were just used to be about efficiency, making a profit. Obviously, there was none of this CSR, corporate social responsibility, which is pervading every major corporation now. They support every cause, and it's now getting to the point where, well, even financial institutions are deplatforming people for wrongthink. It's a de facto social credit system that we're starting to live under.
We are indeed. And just to go back to that video you mentioned, that viral video of the baggage handlers throwing the luggage around, I looked at that and that screamed out to me of morale at rock bottom. Morale inside the airlines has never been so bad. And these are people who are obviously fed up. They're getting paid peanuts. They're working incredibly long hours. They're copping the blame for all the rubbish that's going on. And Alan Joyce and these corporate leaders have cut everything too far back to the bone, and they've allowed no margins at all for the rebuild. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, it's reprehensible as well to see people treating other people's possessions like that. I mean, these guys are behaving very badly, but we need to understand that that's an indication. Any good CEO would see that that's an indication of rock bottom morale. Along with the massive sick leave that's going on at the moment. Sick leave's up to 200%. So, people that just aren't wanting to go to work, they don't like going to work anymore. And when I was there, it was a great place to work. We had our ups and downs, but it got to a place where you couldn't tolerate even putting the uniform on anymore. So, all this wokeness in corporate Australia and in fact around the world and in government. I mean, it's going to cause us a whole lot more grief in the future.
As I said to you before, I haven't flown this year. I have travelled interstate to New South Wales, ACT, and South Australia, but driven, because I just didn't want to go through all the hoops, maybe get flight delayed or cancelled or baggage lost. But this is not a aviation phenomena, if I can call it that. That's unique to Australia in 2022. This is happening in Europe and North America. And one British commentator that I follow, I've actually interviewed her on my program, Katie Hopkins, believes that there is some agenda here to turn people off flying because of its carbon emissions. And I just saw that France are actually going to ban people from flying short distances from to cities in other cities in France or Europe when they can get there by train. It's obviously you're not in the airlines anymore, but what do you make of such a theory?
Yeah, look, I think we're going to see a lot of that as this green climate agenda comes forward. I think this pandemic nonsense is about to burn itself out, and it's been a dress rehearsal for climate change and social credit systems and all that sort of stuff. There's no doubt about that. And yeah, they're going to they're trying on a whole bunch of stuff with aviation at the moment. I understood that they were going to limit flights on extra short-haul flights weren't going to be operating. They're talking about having fully automated flight decks, reducing the number of pilots to one on a flight deck with artificial intelligence, and then they're looking at eventually using artificial intelligence to fly the aeroplane altogether and cut pilots out. So there's a whole lot of this rubbish being talked about. And, you know, I think that's going to wake a lot of people up who are currently snoozing through the pandemic because they don't see it affects them. But when all this stuff starts to come out, and they're going to open their eyes. I believe for a long while that airfares were way too cheap. I think that when the airfares are cheaper than the parking or the cab fare to the airport, you've got an issue. I think people are just getting up, you know, waking up on a Saturday morning and deciding, oh, let's fly to Melbourne and from Brisbane and go down and watch the football or something, instead of just getting in their car and going to the beach. And I think a lot of people are flying for no reason, and that's why we're seeing so many aircraft in the sky. And you know, I used to fly a short haul aeroplane. I enjoyed the lifestyle of a short haul pilot. But you know, if I was operating across to Perth, for example, from Brisbane, I'd take off with full tanks of fuel, and by the time I landed, I'd left 13 tons of burnt kerosene in the atmosphere. I mean, that's I don't see the point. I think flying, honestly, I think flying should be limited. I think we do too much of that. I think we overconsume in so many ways, and flying's one of them.
What obviously Australia, to get to some places, like, you need to fly. I mean, it's very hard. I don't think there's going to be a high rail train that's going to be from Brisbane to Perth. I mean, they can't even build one from Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne. That's been talked about for years and years, but it's never going to happen. And obviously Australia is a big continent. Driving from, say, Brisbane to Perth, that would take over 2 days, maybe, with all the stops there. So certainly it's the air travel will be still essential if you want to need to get to city.
In Australia, that's absolutely true, because the ground infrastructure is not there to, like, we don't have the high-speed rail that they do in other countries, especially in Europe. So quite often, by the time you factor in, and I've done this myself, Tim, I've done a lot of travelling since I left Qantas. I haven't flown on a Qantas aircraft. I've been on 2 Virgin flights. I won't fly with Qantas. I drive most of the time. I went down to the Mission to Melbourne, and I drove 20 hours down and 20 hours back. I would rather drive than fly nowadays. And by the time I worked out, for me to go from Brisbane or northern New South Wales to Sydney, by the time I drive to an airport, park the car, go through security, spend an hour there before I board the aircraft, fly down, wait for my bags, then get transport to where I've got to go, another 2 hours on the road, and I've got the whole thing done, and I've got my car when I get there. So for me, it's a no-brainer. If I've got to go to Sydney from where I live, I'll just jump in the car and drive down.
But they don't want you to drive either. Well, if they want you to drive electric vehicles, which, to recharge them, I mean, it's to fill up with petrol at a petrol station, you're out of there in 5-10 minutes. But for an EV, you got to charge overnight and be at a charging station for at least an hour.
It's not going to work. And, we can do it if we tow a diesel generator behind us. Or we could probably do it. Now, let's think of the money we're going to save in fuel. We could drive maybe from Brisbane to Sydney for under $100, but the extension cord's going to cost us $3.5 million, if you know what I mean. I'm making a pun, but it's just ludicrous. This whole new green agenda is absolutely stupid. There is no logic in it whatsoever.
Now, as you said before, the reason why Qantas hasn't lifted their vaccine mandate is basically, well, they can't admit that they were wrong. And 2022 has been the year when the narrative on the science on COVID has fallen apart from the lethality of the virus itself, the effectiveness of safe and effectiveness of the vaccines, I should say, and also the effectiveness of masks, like you name it, like all of it has fallen apart. And it's like, Australia has been as normal as it has been since 2019, but in terms of the people that it's woken up this year, it's certainly been a year of vindication for those who were stating the truth, but not many were listening at the time.
Oh, it has been. And what is stunning all of us is the fact that despite these legitimate statistics being released, clearly demonstrating that the wisest choice was to do what we did. I mean, I was going to get vaccinated. I was very, very close, Tim. I was only days away from getting Pfizer. And my wife just asked me a question. She said, "Are you sure?" And I thought, well, I better delve into it. And when I delved into it and realized that I couldn't get the information I needed to give informed consent from anybody because nobody had the data, I thought it was crazy to go ahead. And it was clear to most people who were awake that these big pharmaceutical companies were in a race to get the first contracts, because whoever got the first contracts were going to make trillions of dollars, and they've actually done that. But they've done it at the expense of human life, and they will be held to account for that. There's no doubt about that. They will be held to account. But the fact that, like, for example, the mainstream media's treatment of protesters in China is mind-boggling. They're saying, like, Stan Grant and these talking heads on the mainstream channels are praising the protesters for their courage. They say that China's treating them in an unlawful manner. The Chinese government has been cruel. The police are cruel. People are being shot at with rubber bullets. People are being bashed and rounded up and taken away. And yet they're criticising China for that. But it's happened in our own country. So when these things were going on in Melbourne, for example, the mainstream media were calling us all Fruit Loops. But when the Chinese do it, they're heroes. I mean, it's mind-boggling. I'm sure you agree. It's just absolutely absurd the way this is being treated. If the fourth estate, the mainstream media, had done what you guys are doing in alternative media, and that had been broadcast to the wider community, this would have been over 2 years ago.
Yeah, they're certainly not calling the brave protesters in China, who have amazingly are achieving a change in the CCP's COVID zero policy. They're not calling them selfish, anti-science, or what's the new favorite word, cookers, because it's a bit hard to disparage people who are standing up to a totalitarian one-party biomedical police state. But of course, Australia was not much better in 2020, 2021. And the shame of it all throughout that time was that the Australian public, they were compliant and supportive. But as we saw last year, the Omicron variant take the world by storm. And I think after that, Omicron took over, all vaccine mandates, or should I say vaccine coercions, they were completely unjustified, especially for young people. I mean, boosters and that should have only been aimed at the very vulnerable, not the healthy and very able. That is when a lot of Australians got COVID and they'll be like, oh, is that all? And I think that's why we've seen this dismantling. But obviously, now we even see the mainstream media talking about vaccine injuries. There was I'm not sure if you saw it, a sympathetic article in The Age about people waiting to hear back from the government's COVID vaccine injury compensation scheme. That would have been unheard of a year ago.
Yeah, look, that's true. The mainstream media is starting to speak out a little now, and we're grateful to people like Rowan Dean on Sky, who's a consistent campaigner. But what we're seeing is the narrative, the lie has been ramped up by the powers that be, by the bureaucracies and the corporations. The lie's been ramped up because they're now using what they call long COVID as an excuse to cover up the fact that people are being vaccine injured. You know, the symptoms of vaccine injury and long COVID are identical. People at home are still not asking questions as to why all these sports stars are falling over and why all these people are dropping dead. Why has the death rate gone up? And the mainstream media's response to that is, oh, that's a side effect of COVID. That's what's happened because people have got COVID. All the information that we're getting now, based on all the data that's been collected in the last 2 years, is clearly pointing to people's immune systems that have been shot to pieces because they've been vaccinated. My wife and I have had the Delta variant, and we got that in Sydney at a big rally the day that they announced the first case of Omicron coming into Australia. And when we heard the symptoms of Omicron, lo and behold, they were the same symptoms as vaccine injuries. So it's just so blatantly clear to anyone who's half awake that this is just the mainstream protecting itself, absolutely protecting itself. I think a lot of the mainstream personalities have been lulled into thinking that the ship is unsinkable. But now, like the Titanic, now the water's starting to flow over the bulkheads. They're starting to scramble for seats on the lifeboats. And I think they're going to have to, because a lot of them have recognised what happened in Nuremberg, in the Nuremberg war trials. Journalists were actually hung in Nuremberg because they aided and abetted Hitler in crimes against humanity. And in my mind, I'm not saying capital punishment's the way, and I'm not referring to that. In my mind, what we're going through now has been a crime against humanity. So people are starting to get worried about, oh, you know what, I may have backed the wrong horse a bit too hard. And I think the global elite have actually gone too hard too early, to be honest with you. I think they raced ahead of themselves, and I don't think they counted on the kind of opposition that they're getting from everyday people like us, for example, who are speaking up.
Regarding long COVID, that just see the reason I think the media and the COVID doom experts are pushing it is because they're trying to use it as a way to see if they can push for the reintroduction of restrictions, and especially masks. They love masks, and so they want they say, see, this is why we still need to suppress waves, and that's why this is being pushed so much. But with regard to what you said, going too hard with the pushing of these vaccines, there has been incredible back down by, well, our own Atagi. They said that a fifth dose or third booster for those over, I can't remember if it was 50 or 65, would have marginal benefit. And over in Europe, they are not advising or recommending young, healthy people have any more COVID vaccines. And they're going into their winter over there, and it's not COVID they're worried about anymore. It's flu and RSV affecting children because their immune system has been suppressed because of all the years of lockdowns and masks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The toll on humanity, apart from vaccine injuries and or COVID, the virus itself, regardless of whether it's real or not, the ancillary toll that will never ever be quantified. In specifics, we're talking about suicides, a number of people who've died from cancer because they weren't able to get proper medical treatment, and other illnesses that have crept in, heart disease, you name it. Mental illness has gone through the roof. It'll never ever be properly quantified. There have been several attempts by organisations who are awake to what's going on, who are trying to get that message out there. But once again, it gets given short shrift by mainstream media. They need to be telling the story, and they're not. The little bits that they do here and there, they're not driven home hard enough. I mean, look what happened, Tim. We had a Royal Commission, I think, because 4 electricians died from the home insulation scandal. You know, that was big news. That rated its socks off in the mainstream media news organisations. But now we're having all of this stuff happening. It's not rating. It's hardly rating a mention. And the organisations or the personalities who are mentioning it, people like Rowan Dean and others, they stand out in the crowd. It's like also when we watch our Freedom senators in Canberra. They are delivering statesman-like speeches. Unbelievable. I'm talking about Malcolm Roberts. I'm talking about Gerard Rennick, Alex Antic, Matt Canavan starting to speak up now. All of these senators who are really going for it, and we see them delivering Martin Luther King-style speeches filled with truth to empty Senate chambers. And their speeches aren't being broadcast on the mainstream. I mean, I'll be 70 in a few weeks' time, Tim, and I've never seen this country so downtrodden and so corrupted. In every aspect of there's not one institution on the planet that I trust anymore, not one. And I used to be an ordinary mainstream kind of guy who just rolled with the flow, trusted the government. You know, they wouldn't do a thing like this, but now there's no way that I would trust any organisation. I don't even trust churches, corporate churches. And I'm a devout Christian. I don't trust the corporate charities. I don't trust the mainstream media. I don't trust our governments, state, federal, or local. I mean, it's just bizarre. I've never felt so perplexed. Yeah, if it wasn't for my faith in Christ, to be honest with you, I think I'd go nuts.
If you've listened to those senators that you talked about deliver their speeches, they do their homework. They've deep dived into the data. It would have taken them days and days, probably all-nighters, of going through that data, compiling it. It's all from the data. That's what they're quoting in their speech, summarizing it for, well, what should be broadcast to the masses.
They are, and to see Gerard Rennick in the Senate chamber last week, defending that action to force Fair Work Commission to do some things, and to see Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens bring that down, bring that whole argument to its knees based on her petulance. I was just so angry. I don't know about you, but you know, some of these people don't deserve the salary. They don't deserve the conditions that they get to occupy that seat in the chamber. I think Sarah Hanson-Young and others need to be booted out. I think it's a disgrace that they stifled the debate because it's too hard for them to listen to. I just think it's reprehensible.
And now in 2022 in Australia, we saw a change of government from Prime Minister Scott Morrison to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. In my opinion, not much changed in that regard. It was just a different colour, party colour, and Prime Minister. Down here in Victoria, Dan Andrew is re-elected for another 4 years. Please pray for us. And New South Wales has their state election in March 2023. You said that your level of trust in our institutions is extremely low. What do you foresee for 2023? Because as we saw, like somebody who thought, who made predictions for 2019 about what 2020 would look like, couldn't foresee what could happen. What do you think the next year will bring to Australia?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot more of the same under a different banner. You know, as I said earlier on, I think climate change and social credit systems, I think we'll be a cashless society before we know it. I think there are a lot of very sinister things being orchestrated, but we need to keep it all in balance. I think the one thing that touring around and going to these big rallies has shown me is that the spirit of Australia is still alive and well. And I think the people are becoming much more resilient. I think they're coping with things. They're relying on themselves and their communities a lot more. They're relying on governments and corporations less, and that's a good thing. And I think they're starting to realise that education is an important thing. We need to be educated. You know, radical resistance and all that sort of stuff. We're not there. That's not where we need to go. If we educate ourselves and become resistant by asking questions, I think that's the best form of resistance. Don't just take the government's word or the corporation's word or the church's word for anything. Ask the questions. If it smells like a rat, it may well be a rat. And that's the one thing that we've realised in the last couple of years. By asking questions, we slow the whole thing down. And that's what needs to happen. Everyone needs to sit on their hands and not do anything rash. The whole the pandemic response has been a knee-jerk, rash overreaction that we've seen bring down disaster from on high on everybody on the planet. So I think Australia will become more community focused. That's my prayer, that it will. I think we need to become more disciplined in the way we deal with these things. I think I've had to examine the freedom movement, for example, in the last few months. A lot of people are saying, why didn't we achieve so much? We were getting 8% of the population to the rallies, Tim. 8% of Australians were turning up in the streets in all the cities and towns around Australia every weekend for over a year. And the government should have fallen after 3.5%. That's the 3.5% rule, that if 3.5% of a population rally in protest, the government always falls. But they didn't do that. I think most of the people that were turning up at the rallies were everyday mums and dads and everyday people. I consider myself an everyday kind of guy who's just woken up and decided that this is rubbish. But I think the freedom movement got hijacked by people who've been pushing agendas for a long time that haven't been helpful in keeping people in that movement. So I think what we're seeing is the mums and dads have fallen away from it because they've been at rallies where people are talking about a whole bunch of other agendas that they're not across, and they feel weird. So I think we have to be more disciplined. I think we have to recognise that there is a right wing and a left wing, but I've never flown an aeroplane that hasn't flown properly unless both wings were connected. And where all the people in the aeroplane, they're all in the middle. They're between the left wing and the right wing, and that's where it's safe to be, and that's how the thing's designed to fly. So I think we need to consider rebranding ourselves in this movement, because if a lot of people who we want to wake up walk up to a rally and ask you, why are you doing this? Most people would say we're fighting for our freedom. Well, people who are asking the question would say, well, you've already got it. What do you mean? You're out here now rallying. You're not being arrested. Most of them didn't know what went on in Melbourne and Sydney. They're saying, you can go to the cafe and have a cafe latte. You can go to the pub. You can go to work. They still don't know that there are tens of thousands of people mandated out of employment because of their medical procedures. But if you say to people, instead of saying, oh, we're out here for freedom, if you say, well, look, we're out here because we think the government's overstepped the mark on too many occasions, and you give them examples like if you own a property, for example, should you really have to spend 6 months getting approval from the council to put a garden shed in your backyard? Is it feasible for you to be watching like a hawk every street corner that you go past on the road because you're scared there might be a stop camera there or a speed camera or a seatbelt camera, and you're seeing all these blue signs saying speed camera for your safety? Most people will agree that we're over-governed, and Australia is one of the most over-governed countries on the planet. And if we just tell people we're pushing back because we just want the freedom to be able to live a normal life without all this extra overreach, I think we win more people over and we can keep them in the fray a bit longer. So I'm encouraging people to build communities of resistance. For example, let's say that in Queensland, Palaszczuk brings back the red light, and that means everybody's got to have a green tick and a mask to go shopping at Coles or Woolies. Now, if you're in a community of resistance in the Brisbane area, and there's 300 or 400 of you, in order to demonstrate your resistance, you can all go along without a mask and without a green tick to Woolies at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and you can all do your shopping, 300 or 400 of you. And you're pushing the trolleys around and all the staff are saying you're not allowed in, too late, we're already in. And then you go to the checkouts and the manager decides he's not going to sell you your groceries. So the 300 of you there with trolleys full of groceries say, oh, okay, all right. And you just leave your grocery carts there and walk out. I mean, that in itself is a massive way to highlight the ludicrous nature of these lockdowns and these all these mandates. So there's so many things that we can do, but we need to be educated and we need to make sure that we don't perpetrate any more fake news from our side that we get from the other side as well, because I've come to see that fake news is as prevalent on both sides of the fence, and we need to be very careful. We need to stop running down rabbit holes. We need to keep our arguments logical and in perspective, and we need to be disciplined. The reason the Chinese rally movement at the moment is succeeding in many ways is because they're disciplined. They've all decided that they're not going to have banners. They're not going to have. They're not going to wear crazy slogans on their shirts. They're holding up a blank piece of paper.
Well, because that's legal there. Political
right.
slogans are illegal.
But how good is that, though? Because I said about Mission to Melbourne, if we all turned up with a white shirt with a red poppy on it in remembrance, and we didn't have any slogans, we didn't even need speakers. We didn't even need people on a stage spruiking. We just need to stand en masse in quiet protest and fill the streets. That invites people to come up and ask why we're there. And then we can say what's rational. And anyone who's there with pushing different agendas who are, belonging to this organisation or that organisation, they're going to stand out for who they are. But the majority of people will be seen there. They're in between the left wing and the right wing. They just want to see the country restored to some kind of livable existence. And I think discipline is really important in this, and we need to stick to the message. Like when I started going to the rallies, I needed to ask myself why I'm going, because I may be asked by mainstream media, and I was in several press conferences asked why I was there. So I decided the reasons I made the video in the first place and the reasons I've been speaking out ever since are fivefold. The first one is open the borders, never close them again. We're one country, not seven. The borders must never be closed. End the mandates, protect the children, give everyone their jobs back, and we want a royal commission or better. They're the 5 reasons I went to the rally. I didn't go there for any other agendas. They're the things that I spoke to and I spoke about. And I believe that 90% of the people who turned up that were filling the streets in those early days were people who just wanted those things. Now, the last one is a really good one, the Royal Commission. Well, the Royal Commission's not going to have a lot of teeth.
No, they're running it. They're the government who perpetrated all this.
That's right. But there's one good thing about a Royal Commission, and that is that all the underlings in these bureaucracies, they all know that when there's big questions being asked, the guys at the top never get thrown under the bus. They do. And they leak like sieves. And anything that promotes somebody who's caught up in that system to leak like a sieve and produce more information to bring truth to the fore has got to be better than not having anything. What we really need is an independent tribunal like Nuremberg was to make sure that these crimes never happen again. And not just to punish people for what they did. We need to understand, Tim, that if we don't understand the reasons why these things have happened, we're going to repeat them. We have to know how we got into this mess. And the average Australian person got into this mess because they were apathetic and they were bloated on entitlement. They believe the government owes them everything. And they've fallen for this fear narrative, false evidence appearing real. And the governments and the global elite have fed us on fear for hundreds of years. And we've fallen for it. Yeah, let's go back. I go back. I'm nearly 70. As I said, I remember the hole in the ozone layer that we're all going to fry within 3 years. And everybody went crazy and they got rid of CFCs and people were, getting rid of their fridges and that nothing happened. Nothing happened. Then we had the Y2K bug. Everything was going to fall out of the sky and the world was going to end. And, on New Year's Day, 2001, nothing happened. Then we had peak oil. We were going to run out of oil. We've got more oil than we've ever poken a stick at. They found more oil at the moment. We've got more natural resources than we ever dreamt of, but we're all going to run out of oil. And then we've had all the various financial collapses. And we had 9/11 and we had the war on terror. And now we've got all these viruses supposedly coming out. And it's funny how they've all been predicted well in advance. They've even been named and strategies been formed for them, and then they appear. We have been overfed on fear for decades, in fact, hundreds of years. And that drives a narrative that gets us to be compliant, and we comply our way into tyranny as a result of fear. We've got to wake up every morning and realise that, what we did yesterday got us to today, Tim. And what we do today will get us to tomorrow. And I think that's where Australia's got to come to. We've got to realise for 2023, getting back to that question, that there's a lot of stuff that's going to wake up a lot more people, and we have to be disciplined and organised enough to deal with that when it happens and make ourselves accountable and representing of most of the people in the country who'll be waking up slowly but surely. And I think 2023, hopefully COVID, the pandemic, will be the thing that's helped to wake a lot of us up to get us into a better future. I hope so. But my own faith tells me that this only ends when Jesus comes and puts a sword to it all and takes the rest of us home.
Like after the original Nuremberg, we also need to vow, everyone needs to vow never again, because, they want to try this again. We heard at the B20, we need to have passports for the next pandemic, which was quite alarming. But I want to talk about your faith movement. You gave regular testimony
of a truck through. I looked for salvation in all the wrong places, and addiction was one of them. A pornography addiction was one, but I overspent. A new car would make me feel good for a week. A new power tool would make me feel good for a couple of hours. All that sort of thing. It wasn't until I got to the edge of my own demise. I was going to kill myself, as I said. I got to within days of that. I'd set a date to do it. I was going to do it without leaving a note for various reasons. But when I was brought back from the edge of that and realised how close I got to it, I got to ask a lot of questions about why I got there and what was missing. And that journey led me down a pathway towards Jesus Christ. And I realised then, after starting that journey, a man I'd never met 2,000 years ago died the most unspeakable death on the cross, so a filthy porn addict like me could have a second chance. And I believe that was something worth following. And I mentioned that. I talk about the sacrifice that he made on the cross for all of us outside the Jerusalem on the hill. And I reference that too to the 100,000 little white crosses on foreign battlefields that cover the graves of Australians who also fought for our freedom. And I think we need to value that, and we need to understand what drives that and where that comes from. So for me, faith has been an amazing part of my journey. It brought me back from the edge of the cliff. It filled that aching hole in my soul with God. And look, I've had a lot of setbacks along the way. I came into faith like a front row forward in a ballet school. But there's something about my faith that's quite simple. It's not overly bogged down in doctrine. I believe that the corporate church has a lot to answer for. I think religion has a lot to answer for. I think religion has done more to harm God than it's done good. I think it's just destroyed the character of God in the eyes of so many people. And I've often said, and I've said this in church pulpits when I've preached, that religion is the business of God conducted by men, and they're not very good at it. I believe that we should all have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, because that can save you. And to put it in simple terms, I was flying with the guy one day, my co-pilot, who said to me, "Oh, you're worried about the GFC?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, I've got faith." And he said, "What do you mean you got faith?" I said, "Well, I've got a higher power that looks after that." And he said, "You're joking." He said, "Don't tell me you're a born-again Christian." I said, "Well, yeah, actually, I am. Yeah, I am a born-again Christian. And I believe God's in control." And he just said, "I can't believe you think that. How can you believe all that rubbish?" And I said, "Well, I choose to." "What sort of rubbish are you talking about?" He said, "How can you believe that, God created the world in 6 days, the seventh day he rested, all that sort of stuff?" I said, "Well, all right." I said, "Okay, you started the conversation, so let's talk this through. Let me tell you what I think you believe in. You believe you evolved from slime, your life has no purpose, and when you die, you're going to go back to the ground and be worm fodder." He said, "Yep, that's exactly how I see it." I said, "Well, I think that I was created by someone who loves me. My life has a purpose, and when I die, I'm going to go to heaven." He said, "I get that." I said, "Who's going to have a better day, you or me?" And he sort of looked at me startled, and he started to laugh. And I said, "True." I said, "If you could stand with me at the end of time and say, 'See, Hoody, I told you God didn't exist,' I could say, 'Well, blow me down. You could have fooled me. But boy, I've had a great life.'" And that's what sustained me in the last 17 years and 16, 17 years. And it's done wonders. And, there are times when I seem to be very serene and comfortable with the fact that I understand God's in control. And then there are other times when I get perplexed and I seem to wander away from him and everything goes a bit haywire. But I come back, and coming back to my faith always brings me to a peaceful place. I'm struggling a bit at the moment in some aspects because I'm really tired. We've been cracking an exhausting pace in the last year. It's just been phenomenal. We haven't had a break. And I'm just really tired. But I know I'll bounce back from that, and I'm going to stay in the fight without a doubt. But I'll be doing it knowing that I'm on God's side, and I won't be going through any doors unless I know he's opened it. And I'll never step out in front of him. I'll always let him lead. And so far, it's done me good. It hasn't done me any harm. And I've been approached by tens of thousands of people asking for prayers at the rallies. And even atheists, Tim, who say to me, "Look, I don't believe in God, but I can't sleep at night unless I hear you pray at the end of Club Grubbery with John." And I say, "Well, what do you think God's trying to tell you?" And they say, "We haven't worked it out yet." And I said, "Well, you've admitted that there must be a God, so you're no longer an atheist." So a lot of people are coming to realize that if you can't trust any other organization on the planet, where do you put your faith? And I put my faith in a very simple one-on-one relationship with Jesus Christ, and it's held me in good stead for the last 17 years. My life would have been over if I hadn't discovered Christ at the 11th hour, and I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you now. So I've realized that God had something better for me to do, and I'm now living that. I don't think my life was ever about flying airplanes. I think all that ever did was give me the credibility to wear a uniform, and I made that video that's opened up this whole new world that I'm now a part of, meeting incredible people like yourself. I've gone from when I made that video, I thought the spirit of Australia had died, but in the last 18 months, I've seen that it's more alive than it's ever been. And people are coming together in the most beautiful ways now. And faith is playing a large part of that. I prayed in front of over 1 million people, and I've heard 1 million people say amen. And that tells me something, Tim. That tells me that the people are wanting to know more. And it's up to people who have faith to describe what that means in the simplest possible ways. And that's what I've just tried to do.
Well, we're very grateful that you're with us today. Sorry. You haven't got me a bit emotional hearing that story. I'm normally very composed on this program, but that was truly an inspiring story to hear. Now, uh, I'd like to finish off by just I'm sort of indulging my own fascination with your profession, because I know how to drive a car. Like, I practiced and did my hours and that, but learning to fly a plane, I mean, it's such a, it seems to all of us such an advanced skill, and if the pilot doesn't do it right, it can kill people. Like, that's why those air crash investigation programs are so high rating. Like, how is the training process, and like, what's it like? Because you've, as you said, you've done over 35,000 hours. You obviously loved it. Can you describe the training process, and just how having that, well, it's a responsibility that you carry. How what is the life of a pilot like, from training to just every day?
Look, it's very exciting. It's a boy's own adventure for me. I've had the most incredible life. I've flown lots of wonderful aeroplanes. I've carried lots of interesting cargo and people. I've carried 6 million people over 12 million miles and 22,000 takeoffs and landings. I never left anyone up there. But, you know, I had a boyhood dream at the age of 5 when I saw it was a Qantas super constellation fly over the house I lived in Wollongong. And I grew up in a dysfunctional family, but I realised when I was lying on the grass looking at that plane go over that that's what I wanted to do at the age of 5. And so I lived into that. I built model aeroplanes, and I read books about it. And I had a pretty rough childhood, as I said, and I didn't get to complete education after age 13. I basically stopped educating at age 13, and I had a criminal record by the time I was 17. And I've been able to rise to the top of my profession in what was once the most trusted and one of the oldest airlines in the world. So it's been a real feather in my cap to do that. But what got me there was the love of it, Tim. It wasn't for the love of looking forward to a high income. That, you know, it's a reasonable income when you become a senior pilot. And it wasn't for wearing the uniform, and it wasn't for the glory and the glamour. Those days are over now anyway. It was purely for the love of seeing the houses get smaller when you pull back on the stick, and see them get bigger when you push forward, and flying around thunderstorms and seeing their majesty right up close, and realizing that the aim of the game always in flying is to do what the hat says, to stay out of the trees. That's what that slogan means. That's a little slogan I came up with years ago. I used to tell all my mates before we went flying, don't forget, boys, make sure you stay out of the trees, because the last thing you want to do is put an aeroplane into the trees. So for me, it was just a labor of love. And I was really fortunate that each step along the way, when I found it really difficult to do the study, like the courses you've got to do are intense. And when you haven't had an education and you've had no maths and no physics, and you're studying things like meteorology and aerodynamics and principles of flight and navigation, all these things you've got to learn. It's very daunting. But you do it bit by bit. You know, it's like eating the elephant one mouthful at a time. And I found it an incredibly humbling experience to realise that as I progressed through my career, more and more people were putting their faith in me to get them from A to B safely, and I found that very, very humbling. I made a point very early in the piece to leave my ego in the cupboard at home when I went to work, because ego and flying don't go very well together. And I've enjoyed the company of amazing people in the industry. I've been trained by the best. I've worked for the best. Qantas was, without a doubt, Qantas and TAA, Australian Airlines, Bush Pilot Airways, companies that I worked for, were the best in their industry. And I was privileged to do that with no education. So I'm a very, very lucky boy. And look, the joy of everyday flying is it can be challenging. flying in bad weather is incredibly challenging, and it's where we really get to practice our craft. Landing on a strip of concrete in a dark, stormy night can be pretty daunting. But I tell you what, when you do it and you pull it off really well, there's no better feeling. And but then there are times when you dread it, like when we have to do our simulator retraining every 3 months. We've got to go and get into the simulator, and they throw everything at you. You're a nervous wreck before you go in there, because your whole livelihood depends on whether you pass or fail. And you're your own worst critic. You tend to self-critique a fair bit in flying, which is a good thing. So I used to dread doing simulators, but I always felt relieved when I got a good mark and got out of there and thought, well, I've still got it. And so for me, 53 years of aviation was absolute amazing. It was an incredible adventure, flying around North Queensland, up to New Guinea, carrying live crocodiles around in old DC-3s, flying jet aircraft, crop dusting, flying under power lines for a living, flying under power lines at night, spraying cotton, all these things I did, mustering cattle with an aeroplane. I had an absolute ball, and it all ended way too quick. It all ended very unceremoniously. It was not the way I thought it would end. It was quite sad the way it ended, but I felt I had to do it that way. I look back on it now with great joy, with a sense of satisfaction. I was flying better than I ever had on my last flight. My last couple of years in the job, where I was at the peak of my performance, I left on a high note, and no one had to tap me on the shoulder and say, come on, you're getting a bit too old. I was flying really, really well. So I'm just been a lucky man. And I don't think aviation will ever be the same again. I think I've seen the best of it. But on the tour we just completed a couple of weeks ago, I sat in the jumbo at the Longreach Founders Museum, and I put an old uniform on, and I filmed a couple of segments in there for our program. And I shed a tear, I've got to be honest with you. And parked alongside the jumbo was an old DC-3 that I flew. And it was just sitting there, and I saw, between the jumbo jet and the DC-3 and the Super Constellation, there was only 38 years of progression between, when a DC-3, which was a World War II aircraft, was seen as the peak of technological advancement. And 38 years from that, we found ourselves in Concords and some of these new aircraft that we're flying now. It's amazing how quickly it's gone. And having to stay abreast of that and keep learning as you go along has been very good for the brain as well. So if I had it to do all over again, I would. But I'd probably go to the Royal Flying Doctor Service as a young pilot and say, here I am. Put me to work for life. I'll stick with you guys for life. I think I would have found that much more rewarding than airline flying. Landing on a highway in the middle of the night out in the bush somewhere to pick up a road accident victim, and having babies delivered in flight, all that sort of community flying would have been great. I would have loved that. But it is what it is, and now I'm flying higher than I ever have, doing what we're doing by having these conversations. And So I've tried to compress as much of a 53-year career in a few minutes to answer that question, Tim, but I'm a man many times blessed because of my career.
It's as I said, your all of your life stories are inspiring, and what you're doing now is inspiring as well. And it's been an honor to speak with you, and it's been an experience for me as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tim. Is it all right with you if I pray it out?
Go for it.
Great. Dear Lord, Father in heaven, it's been a blessing to talk to a like-minded young Australian who's asking relevant questions, because relevant questions need to be asked. Because when we ask relevant questions, we pray that we get truth, and you often tell us that the truth will set us free. So, Lord, we pray that we live in truth, that we look into 2023 with a newfound vigour and a hope for a relationship with you as we grow into this crazy world that we're living in, Father. So please bless us one and all in Jesus' name. Amen.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net.
And I am back live. And as you saw with my interview with Graham, I was quite touched when he talked about his Christian conversion, even though myself, I am an atheist, given that it saved him from a suicide plan. So that was very moving to hear. Now, I thought I'd end the show since there's no longer a Trad Tasman talk on Friday, so I won't see you next until Monday. I thought I'd do a quick news blast. So, some very sad news coming out of New Zealand. Due brought this to our attention last week about this couple who their baby needed heart surgery, and they only wanted blood used from unvaccinated individuals. So the New Zealand High Court has ruled that the state will take custody of their baby. The Auckland High Court. So they will be placed in temporary custody so that an operation to correct a heart disorder could go ahead. This is from Rebel News. So health authorities said that the parents' pleas were impractical, unnecessary, despite willing unvaccinated donors wanting help. The boys' parents said they had dozens of donors willing to give blood for their son's surgeries. The court said the overriding issue is whether the proposed treatment is in the baby's best interest. So the child will be held under medical guardianship of the court until the completion of his surgery and recovery by the end of January at the latest. The parents remain custodians for all other purposes and will be informed at reasonable times of the nature and progress of baby W's condition and treatment, the ruling says. So there you go. In New Zealand, your children belong to the state. They don't belong to you. And even though the baby's parents will regain custody, the state can take it away at any time in the future if they don't think that the parents are making a decision that they approve of. Now, moving to Victoria and the Victorian Liberal opposition, counting has continued in the Victorian state election, and the counting of absentee, pre-poll, and double checking postal has actually increased Labor's vote and also increased Dan Andrews' seat tally. The upper house seats won't formally declared until next week, when the writs are due to be returned to the governor on December 13th. The Victorian Liberal opposition elected their new leader today, and that is John Basciuto, a modern Liberal, which is just another word for moderate or left-wing Liberal, won the ballot. He won back the seat of Hawthorn from Labor and also fended off a challenge off the Teals there. So he was elected by one vote against Shadow Police Minister and member for Berwick, Brad Batten. And so we shall see if he is able to bring the Liberal Party back from another 4 years in the wilderness in another 4 years. Now, of course, Dan Andrews declared that after his re-election at the November 26th election, that Victoria was a progressive state. He said it was like the Massachusetts of Australia, and one of his unveilings or legacy buildings, which he opened in 2021. Was the Victorian LGBT Pride Centre in St Kilda. And so what was going to be on tonight was something called Glitter Nova, end of year celebration. And it was also sponsored by the city of Stonington. So it had drag workshops and performances by Alexander McQueen, Randy Ray, and Bilal Bazaar, and DJ set by DJ Gay Dad. Now, last night, it was circulated amongst nationalist groups on Telegram that a protest should be organised against this grooming event, and the LGBT community, or what was called the queer community defense, they decided they were going to organize a pro or defense of this event. But in a significant victory for the anti-grooming movement, the event was cancelled, and the queer community defense call, as they call themselves, was quite upset. Because of threats from fascist groups, the local councillors decided to cancel the queer youth event tonight. Earlier, we called out for community support to defend this event. The kids attending and the performers, we are frustrated that the council has given these homophobes a win, but that can't be changed. The kids are the focus, as it should be, but we won't be bullied into submission so easily. We ask people to commit to turning up, deny the fascists a photo opportunity, and let them know that we won't be pushed over. We can't predict what will happen. We don't know if kids will rock up who didn't get the message in time, and we don't know if these fascists will turn up at all. We advise people to travel in groups, bring only yourself and whatever flags or sign you want. We stand together in union, community, and in solidarity. And Slack Bastard also goes by the name Andy Fleming, when interviewed by Raf Epstein on ABC Radio this afternoon, he admitted that the cancelling of this event could embolden the groups targeting these events. If the aim was to prevent an event from taking place, they appear to have done that. And the drag queen who was also a performer at that youth fest back in October at Queen's Park, organised by the Moonee Valley Council, which the NSN protested against. So you'll remember that that drag queen's name was, well, I'll play you. She posted it on her Instagram, social media, this message about the cancellation.
Hello, it's your local psychedelic lizard wizard. I do want to make a very particular note about the Glitter Nova event tonight, which is at the Vic Pride Centre in St Kilda from 6:30 till 8:30 p.m. Unfortunately, some alt-right groups have organised to protest this event, and in light of this, Stonington Youth Services and Minus 18 have decided to postpone the event. Now, my concern here is Stonington Youth Services have put out a statement very late in the piece through a channel that does not have very much engagement, and they have limited comments on this post. So I'm not sure how many people will get the message. I'm unsure if emails have been sent out to ticket holders yet, and Minus 18 has not put out a statement as of the moment I'm recording this on either Facebook or Instagram. I understand that because this is very late in the piece, some of you may be getting ready to go out now, some of you may already be travelling. For the young people who are thinking of attending, I would strongly advise you to turn around right now, or organise something separate with your friends tonight and just take care of each other. Do not come to the Vic Pride Centre if you are planning on coming and enjoying the event. However, we are still pretty certain that these protesters will show up, and as a sign of solidarity, I do encourage older people in the queer community, anyone who has spoons, to show up and help out tonight. We cannot give these people an inch. All we have is each other. Sending all of my love.
So that was Balial Bazaar, who's whose name translate from Hebrew into demon flesh or devil flesh. She's of Croatian ethnic descent, FYI, for those of you wondering. And the LGBT news website even credited the Telegram groups that were spreading word of a protest. So that was XYZ News, Turning Point Australia, and Australian Meditation's Nationalist Yarn chat, run by, they say, suspected National Socialist Network members. The post spoke about a protest being planned at the event by a group calling itself People Against Pedos. Now, they have vowed that the event will be rescheduled. This, as it was called, Glitter Nova. So we shall see, and they'll probably have a huge security and police presence. Now, possibly because of the grooming phenomena in the West and the LGBT indoctrination in the schools, this is obviously having the non-Western conservative countries are obviously seeing this, and so it's having an effect there. I might call it the Qatari effect, given that the Western nations' virtue signaling on LGBT issues has actually hardened Qatar's traditional Islamic conservative culture. And there's just been passed a law this week in the Indonesian parliament. So they have lawmakers have approved a new criminal code which will apply to Indonesians and foreigners alike, and will also prohibit cohabitation between unmarried couples. It'll also ban insulting the president or state institutions, spreading views counter to the state ideology, and staging protests without notifications. And so this is despite worries that the laws may scare away tourists from its shores and harm investments. The Australian government's smarttraveller.gov.au website already has a travel warning, which says the Indonesian parliament has passed revisions to its criminal code, which includes penalties for cohabitation and sex outside of marriage. These revisions will not come into effect for another 3 years. And now, given that Indonesia only recognizes traditional marriage, man-woman marriage, it would be a de facto sodomy law outlawing same-sex relations. It's already outlawed in the Aceh province, which is governed under Sharia law. And also Russia's parliament this week, they already had their LGBT propaganda ban to minors. Now they have extended it to the whole of society. So Russia's ban on, this is from LifeSite News, Russia's ban on LGBT material to encompass adults. Individuals can face up to $6,400 fines for violation. So it was signed into law by Vladimir Putin last Sunday. So it bans propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations, gender reincitement, and pedophilia amongst all ages. So the ban includes propaganda disseminated via books, movies, social media, advertisements, and traditional media. Foreigners can face expulsion from the Russian Federation if caught violating the law. So yes, as Western society goes in one direction, the rest of the world goes in another direction there. Now, as you know, I've been promoting the Melbourne Underground Film Festival MUF, organised by a Report from Tiger Mountain host Richard Wollstonecroft. I attended opening night where I saw for the first time the screening of Topher Field's Battleground Melbourne film. My interview with Topher after the show will be posted probably on this channel in the next few days, because I think the Unshackled YouTube channel still has a strike because it took down Richard Wollstonecroft's ad for Muff for 2020 election denial. But closing night is on this Saturday. You can get your tickets by going to muff.com.au. That takes you to the try booking link. So closing night films is they're screening one of Richard's own film. It's one of his first films, The Debt Collector. And it'll finish off with a screening of My Son Hunter by Robert Daffy. And then there'll be the Muff Awards for the best film in the festival and closing night party. So I'm not sure if I'll be there for closing night, but if so, I'll post it on my social media. That's where you can be notified of all my upcoming shows and also Unshackled content news from the website. So thank you everyone for tuning in to WilmsFront tonight. I'll see you next for Tim's News Explosion, Monday, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the WilmsFront channels. Until then, have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay sane. Make sure the weather doesn't impact you in a negative way. Fingers crossed it'll be a nice weekend down here in Melbourne. So good night, everybody, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com to view the archive of episodes, and keep visiting the unshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.